Hello, Helen.
Hey, Dave.
How are you?
Good.
It was really good to meet you, like we were, about to be wed or something. First time we ever saw each other in person is at a Kadence event.
There you go.
Yeah, such a pleasure to meet you in person.
Yeah, and like most people, you went, oh, you're so much taller than I thought.
Yeah, it's always interesting to be Zooming with people and then you see them in person. And I'm a huge proponent of this whole distributed and flexible work movement, but the thing that I think you just can never put a price tag on is like the ability to like shift and change the conversation dynamics that you're having with someone in person. Like you can't replicate it.
No, and the little moments, the little things that are going on whilst we're sitting here, or we're like having a first hug, or it's just.
And we have to be present with each other, even if we don't want to be. Not that I want to be, but you know what I mean? Like if you're on Zoom and stuff, you can be
totally.
working on a document or, whatever else. I think it's important to be honest about the fact that we're never fully present on Zoom.
No, however much you want to be.
Yeah, but here we are. And it's cool to meet you. So we're here to talk about Kadence events, right?
Yes, yeah.
And for those that listen to this, we're going to go on a bit of a journey to get there.
Yeah, the moments that matter.
Like it makes sense that we're calling it Kadence events, but in reality, what we're doing is facilitating or helping facilitate. We're not doing it, but helping facilitate moments that matter in a company. And to me, like it feels important to think of the I'm going to say like chronological context from like pre-COVID to now and why they matter a lot more. I have a lot of thoughts on it, but do you have any thoughts on sort of like this pre-COVID to now shift in sentiment and how we work and everything?
For sure. I mean, even this scenario that we're in where, we haven't met. And so this feels like a significant moment that matters for us as colleagues, for us as friends. We've connected, I think, super well, like without having ever met. But there's still a different, like you just talked about, there's a different dynamic to us being face to face. And then the reality of what we're here to do and achieve in this time over the next few days. It's just a different paradigm to how this would have played out a few years ago.
Yeah, we would have met in the office, probably, right? On a typical day.
Yep.
Where everybody was just sort of working around.
Yeah.
And I've actually heard from people that they struggle connecting with colleagues even when they are in person starting their job from the office because people are doing their thing that day, right? And so trying to break into someone's day or flow or interpersonal relationships that are already ongoing, it's a challenge. And I think that's actually why in many respects, we're reframing how we onboard, how we facilitate these moments that matter throughout a year to build and maintain trust, right? And we're seeing the data on it too, right? Atlassian's putting out research talking about when trust starts to dissipate, and it starts to have an empirical dissipation, if that's a word, around 4 or 5 months, right? So it's we need to do this at some frequency to build and maintain trust.
Yeah, for sure. And I think to your point about this journey to where we are now and why events and these moments that matter so much, it's just, for me personally, so different post-COVID to pre-COVID in the way that we have been able to build our colleague relationship, right? And I think we have had a different dialogue and dynamic, and we're now kind of doing something with that face to face. And we wouldn't have gone on this journey the way that we have in our little microcosm of two people working together and getting to know each other. I don't think this way pre-COVID. And I just think it's important to kind of really dig into this because it's going on around the world for teams and colleagues all the time, and yet a lot of people just are not kind of calling it out. They're just acting and living and working the way, or trying to, the way they did before. But the world's changed.
Yeah, I know. I've actually thought about that a lot. And I think the degree to which it was so unnatural to experience this experiment that COVID induced, because it was a side effect of COVID, right? That we all got thrust into this like remote way of working. And so like, I think it's a natural human response from really, frankly, all stakeholders, but particularly those that are responsible with having to shift the landscape, which are like the workplace leaders, the senior executives or whatever. Like the shift towards flexible working at scale or distributed working or whatever the hell we want to call it is just such a mountain to climb that you wouldn't want to go like in that direction fully. You would want to revert. And I have all kinds of understanding and empathy for that. If I was in that position, I'd be like, oh my God, like.
Yeah, this is so complicated. It's too hard. You know, who am I as a real estate leader or facilities leader or HR person to figure this all out on my own? Actually, let's just stick to what we know.
Yeah. But like, I think that the context of like where we were and where we are now is so important because like there were always 4 stakeholders. I think it's 4. Let me try to count them out. There was, you know, your relationship to your employer, your relationship to the important people in your life, which for many people is a partner of some kind, often a child or someone that they're responsible for, a caregiving role. There's yourself, your relationship to yourself, and then there's the community that you live within too, right? Those were all there before COVID. But the implied contract, and with no real malice intent, I think in most cases, was that your responsibility to your job was like the main one. But now you can't, like, people just can't unknow the deeply emotional and traumatic and growth-oriented ways that they've changed since COVID, right? And inevitably, that actually means that their relationship to their job is not as central as it was before. And that is not a bad thing. And in it not being a bad thing, I think it puts a ton of emphasis on moments that matter, gathering places and meeting places instead of like space, right? Like all this stuff matters greatly. And I'd love to get your take on what I'm saying. The last thing I'll say is like, I think that we were physically proximate to our colleagues to a much higher degree than we were to our families, obviously. And I think in many respects, we actually took those collegial relationships for granted. Yeah. Just like we are very, very guilty of taking our personal relationships for granted. Yeah. And now it's almost the inverse. Yeah. And to me, that's a huge reason why events or moments that matter greatly. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about some of the things that we're doing at Kadence to try and build like meaning around how we get together. So, you know, events that we're doing ourselves, like our company, and I'm still calling it off-site, but it's actually an on-site, where we're together for a period of time, all of us, and like we don't really know each other. Like we like you're talking about, you know, it never really mattered that we didn't know each other, as you're saying, pre-COVID, but now it kind of feels like it really does. And so we have the opportunity as we come together to like have those conversations about what's going on in each other's lives like this, as opposed to, I think I should ask you over Zoom how your day's going, but I think you're probably just going to give me a short answer and move on to the task list that we have. Well, yeah, because the tiger's chasing us every day. Right, like I've got this like 40-minute window and then I need to get to something else. And so I should ask, but I don't have time for it. Whereas face-to-face,
in an event that's been created with the purpose in mind of connection and meaning. There's something meaningful here. That's a really different experience.
Totally. And like, I think of my old company, right? We had one event every year that was a big deal, and we called it the company kickoff. And like, with no disparaging intent, it was basically a glorified sales promotional event, right? Where it was not inclusive. It was really there to pop up the people that were making the most money for the company, and it really felt icky for a lot of people, right? And that's the kind of thing that nobody has any time or energy for anymore. And when we may actually meet our colleagues in person for the first time in a situation like this, like, it's just so important to be present and to make it more about getting to know each other and perhaps like less about work or targets or whatever the company's trying to achieve, right? Because it's like, if we get that right, the trust exhaust that carries from there is huge. But like, one other thing I want to call out is I was speaking to someone about a year ago and kind of remarking, my philosophy for work and life and how it's quite flexible. And the person said to me, you need to be careful about basically projecting your experiences of the world and your background and being comfortable building deep rapport with people online, because you are good at that. And you need to recognize that a lot of people are actually not capable in that way. Or maybe that's the wrong, I really want to be cautious and I don't want to make this negative. I'm not trying to say anything negative about anyone. But he also highlighted to me that it's actually not a generational thing. Like, it's not like young people are just more inclined to being able to build relation online. It can be that even people that grew up in this digital era struggle with that.
Yeah, and it's also just the reality of the way that we have created work, right? Like, work versus who you are really. It's like these two me's that I have to remember to be, like. And it was actually so much easier for everybody pre-COVID, because you just, to your point, like, this was my experience. Maybe it's not everybody's experience, but I really felt that it was much cleaner pre-COVID.
For better and for worse.
Right.
But yeah, cleaner.
Like, cleaner, clearer, like, this is how I'm supposed to behave at work, in the office, this is how I act, and then this is home. And when home started to fill with work things, because we were just Zooming the whole time, those lines got blurred. And I think for some people, it's harder than for others to really pull that divide truly apart and just be that individual. And to your point in the posts you've been making recently, like, that life work integration is harder for some than for others. Like, it's not comfortable for a lot of people, I think. And so I think that's one of the reasons that leading post-COVID, being a leader in a post-COVID world where actually it's about trying to be as real as you can, is just new. Like, I wouldn't have to do that as a leader before. I could be behind my work, guys.
Well, they created a show on Apple TV called Severance to articulate in a very dramatic light what you're describing. But I think the bottom line is, as much as it was cleaner, as you say, it was also arguably more painful, but perhaps like subdued and beneath the surface. And that goes back to, like, we can't unknow anything. And so, yeah, I think, like, I'm not personally a believer that, and I share a lot of myself, that you bring your whole self to every situation or your whole self to work or whatever. Like, I think that we need to protect ourselves in certain respects. And I actually think intuitively we know what is right for us individually on that level. but there still is this movement towards authenticity. And
Yeah.
in every respect, right? Like I even just from a writing standpoint, I try not to undershare or overshare. And then I think the same is true when we gather together. It's like we do need to get to know each other on a more personal level when we are more and more and more distributed. And to just like riff on that for a second, data from Atlassian's report, 1,000 Days Working Distributor, or whatever it was, like they're a bleeding edge company that's not representative of the average company, but nonetheless, I think that what's happening over there in this bleeding edge world will eventually become more average. And they hired remote employees at a rate of 14% pre-pandemic, which they constitute as being 2 hours or more from an office, so it's inconvenient to get there. But by 2023, by flipping their model completely, that number went up to 57%, and they cited that it's continuing to rise. So that's a bleeding edge example. But do we think that that will bleed into the average talent attraction and retention strategy of like more, typical companies? I think over time, yes, that will happen. And if that's the case, then we can't just throw together, events that don't have a lot of thought behind them. Like we really have to make it matter. So what I'd love to know from you is like, you wear a people hat inside of our company, and then you also speak to people leaders externally. And like, how can we help them?
Yeah, I mean,
and the people in the company, like how can you help us and how can we help them?
Yeah, and I think that like the question for me is culturally what matters to each organization, because not every company, not every team is going to do this the same way, but like really understanding what meaning means to your team when you come together, and then creating those moments that matter, that are truly meaningful for your team, your organization, your culture. And so I think that's why for us at Kadence, having a communications tool, a way that you can communicate regularly with your team about the things that do matter to that team, and then bring them together to talk about those is key. So I mean, I was recently talking to one of our customers about how they have, so they're a tech company and they have an engineering team who has a certain expectation about how regularly they should be coming together and for what. And then they have a kind of more of a commercial team who have a very different perspective on what is meaningful, what matters in those moments. And the great thing using Kadence is that you can create the moments that are meaningful, specific to your team. The commercial team can create something that feels good for them. The engineering team can do something different, but they're still both bringing their parts of the organization together. And then as a kind of overarching organizational culture, they can learn from each other, also using the tool, and then on some kind of less regular degree, but still there's a level of regularity, they're going to try and create the moments that matter to everyone. So this is complicated. There's like within one organization, there's two very different teams with really different expectations and needs and ways of working. But the important thing is that they're trying, right? They're doing this. They're going to bring people together in a cadence that matters to each of them, to be together in ways that are different but have meaning, and then try and figure out, like, across the organization, what do we stand for and what are we going to do when we all come together. And we somewhat have that exact same, I don't want to call it challenge, it's just opportunity to like keep talking to our team. We've got an event in Amsterdam in a few weeks' time, and
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it seems like most of the team are looking forward to it, but they are looking forward to different things about it. And so, it's how we I suppose as a senior leadership team, achieve what we would like to when we bring everybody together and get clear about what those things are. And then for me, it's about allowing some unstructured time so that the connection, the moments,
To create serendipity, you need to actually ironically have structure, I find. Yeah. Dan and I had an interesting version. Like the structure of a serendipitous moment between me and our CEO was we had the intention of going to a conference together. So we knew we didn't like bump into each other on the street. We knowingly went to the same place. But then we decided to spontaneously record a video together, and we were walking along the waterfront of Lisbon. And I had like a noise reducing like thing on my microphone, and it fell off. And this it was really windy, and this was a big wide open space. It could have easily fallen into the water. And Dan is a determined individual. And we spent 15 minutes trying to find this thing, and like I was gonna give up like very, very quick. He wouldn't give up. And eventually we found it. And like what a serendipitous rapport building opportunity, right? And so this is just like those unstructured moments are critical. And it's funny, you were talking about like the things that people are excited for about our offsite. I'm actually excited about lots of them, but one of them is selfish. You, as a company, Kadence is helping reduce the cost of me getting my family across to Europe for the first time. My wife's never been to Europe. My daughter is obsessed with Paris because she follows the show Fancy Nancy. And so like it's making it more economically viable for us to come over.
Yeah.
And like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
You know, like there's those wins.
Yep.
And many different permutations of the same.
Yeah, totally.
But then I think it's important. We're talking about these like the importance of gathering for increasingly distributed workforces, which is of course a macro trend and inevitability. But then I'll cite some more research because I think the office holds a place in the future as a gathering place or a meeting place. And then of course it goes beyond the office from that perspective as well. But I think the events at the office on a micro scale, on a day-to-day scale, matter greatly for those people that need or want to go to the office with a higher degree of frequency than maybe the average. So to cite the data, Atlassian has a fully choice-led approach to how people use their offices, right? And they found that roughly 26% of people that live within a commutable distance, so it needs to be reasonable for these people to get there, are going in 1 to 2 times a week. And so obviously in totality, it's less than 26% of their workforce that are going in with that frequency.
Yeah.
But there's still a defined need there for that office to exist and for programming to happen around the daily experience that those people have as well. And Kadence is there to facilitate and help out with that too, right? And I know this from talking to some prospective customers that we're having conversations with, or at least that I'm having conversations with, that they really care a lot about both. Like they care about framing the year around moments that matter, and they care about those people that are going on a daily basis having a really, really great experience.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'm not going to call it the dark side, but like if workplace leaders are expected to heed the directives of a mandate on behalf of senior leadership, which is the case inside of at least some proportion of the workforce, their lives need to be made a little bit easier to actually make that in-office experience more palatable and more enjoyable for those that go. You know?
And I think there's also there's a spectrum, isn't there? And I think we have to be careful that we often at Kadence, we're so passionate about the future, and we can see it, but there's a lot of organizations, customers and non-customers, that are quite far from that. And so, and the reality is that perhaps they are going to need to be in the office much more than some of the organizations we're talking about. I was talking to, and we did a recorded conversation with Maud, who works for DWI,
What is GWI for those that I don't know?
A workplace leader. So they're a research organization, and they have like quite a high proportion of staff who are in really regularly, like more than 3 days a week, and they are trying to do this combination of like very meaningful, like strategic vision sessions in the office, and they also want to get people together to watch the Euros, you know, and they also want to have people come in and do their weekly team meetings and use the space however it feels best for those teams. So there's like, you know, lots of different needs there, but all of those are facilitated in lots of different events, and all of those are facilitated through the Kadence events solution. But yeah, it's complex. Like there's such complexity to what we're talking about, and you'll hear Dan, our CEO, talking about like chaos to order. And I still haven't come across a better analogy for what we're trying to do with this moving feet of hybrid or distributed work, or like you said, whatever you want to call it.
It's fascinating. I still am confounded by how fascinating it is that an externality like a global pandemic created this side effect of both accelerating and inflecting work. Like, it's abnormal. I wonder when the next globally shared experience will happen. I don't know. I think it's just like, it's fundamentally changed us, and it's called into the forefront, like all the things that were beneath the surface. Yeah, and it's super messy. I've learned the importance of separating some of my own beliefs and ideologies and hopes and wants and needs and desires for the future from what may be different needs, wants, and desires from different people and different organizations, and then also in the middle, like what is reality right now? And I think reality is what you described. Like there's a lot of organizations out there that actually require more proximate attendance to be able to effectively run the company for whatever the reasons are. And that's reality.
Yeah.
It's just reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and their change trajectory is just very different. It's a lot slower. It's happening, but it's significantly slower than some of the organizations we've referenced. And that's fine. That's okay, but it's happening. And to deny that it's happening is, I think, where we see some of the problems, and certainly in our experience within customers, you know, if there's a fundamental difference between like what the employee base is starting to need and want and what senior leadership need and want. Yeah.
I think that we are going to experience a technological revolution in the workplace that is a trailing inevitability of the technological revolution that we experienced in the business to consumer context. So like today I wrote a post from an Uber. Okay. So I had a car on demand where I wrote a piece of content that went out on a social media platform while listening to Spotify while my wife was at home running an Airbnb rental. Like those are 3 technological applications or tools that permeate our life. And all 3 of those things were happening for my life and my sphere and circle all at the same time. And I think that now is the time actually that movement will happen within the business to consumer world. And that's where we sit, and that's what we're supporting. And what I've noticed as a sort of beginner in this like tech world, because I'm coming from being a broker in a very analog world, is a lot of organizations' experience of tech tools that support the hybrid workplace experience are framed around like legacy and disparate systems.
Yeah.
And there's this whole new movement that's actually been brought on by COVID in the tech world for hybrid working or flexible working. And I think that movement is just starting to happen now. And what I'll say on camera is, you can't search for what we're building at Kadence very easily online. You can search for room and desk booking tools, but you can't necessarily search for a hybrid home for employees or a flexible work operating system.
No.
Or like a flexible work co-pilot for employees. You can't search for these things. But this is ultimately what we're building, is a frictionless user experience to make people's decision making around where they're working and why they're doing that like way, 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 way better.
Yeah.
And so my assertion, like the company has the assertion that companies who don't get hybrid right won't survive. And I agree with that. I think another way of saying it is like companies that don't consider their employees customers won't survive. Thoughts?
Yeah. And I you've probably heard me say this recently, but I'm so clear on the difference between those organizations that treat their employees like customers and those that don't. And I can see it in the way that they're using Kadence, like the difference in the way they actually use the product. So just the ongoing communication with the customer is kind of obvious. Like any good brand is regularly communicating with their customer and getting feedback and feeding that into the product. And there's this just a common understanding that that's what you have to do to build great products for customers and get them to keep coming back. And what we're encouraging our customers to do at Kadence is keep asking your employees, like keep communicating the comms around your hybrid strategy and how you're doing it and how it's going and the impact that it's having on your employees' work and lives is like paramount. Keep talking to them, and we can help you enable that with the product, with the Kadence product. And it's just really stark for me, the difference between those companies and those teams that do see that and are doing it, and those that just don't get that yet. They're just not in that headspace or they don't have that culture yet, perhaps, where the voice of the employee really does count, and they are going to listen and they are going to do something about what that employee is saying. And I see that, like, when we look at the kind of change trajectory that we're talking about, like your ability to get on that change train and stay on it, and like it's hard, but like keep moving in that direction, for me is connected to how much you're going to communicate and be comfortable to keep communicating with your customer, your employee, about how it's going, right? So if you can do both those things, like stick at it, the change is hard, but like commit to doing it, and then alongside keep the communication going, like you're getting there. Like this is working. It doesn't feel like it is a lot of the time, but you're going in the right direction. But if you're not prepared to kind of do one or either of those things, like you're not having this dialogue with your customer, with your employee, and you're kind of avoiding the change because it just feels too hard. Like there are problems ahead.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And my observation is like I think I talked to a lot of people last year in 2023 and even early this year. They're very demotivated by talking about the future of work or flexible working and what's going on right now. I think a lot of people were like kind of feeling, I mean, from one respect, I think it was like post-traumatic growth and stress from COVID that were just sort of like settling in. Like, we were not dealing with like a proverbial tiger chasing us, and we finally were like, oh my God, I'm like literally on the floor.
Yeah, fair. Like
right? Yeah. So there's that part of it that I think just disenchanted us all with a lot of things. But I think we were seeing that we were losing hope that like maybe we are just like reverting all the way back or something. I think it's becoming pretty clear that that's not happening. I think we've reverted in a very natural way to some degree because it's like it was just too intense. But I'm sitting here in July of 2024 feeling actually very optimistic about 2025 and 6 and 7, like, And the reason I am actually has a lot to do with joining this company and starting to talk to these workplace leaders from a completely different vantage point than helping them sign a lease or negotiate a lease. And I'm just seeing that they are actually they're intellectually curious about what is new and what is out there. And they're very, very invested in improving the employee experience. So I think that feels like a pretty good way to close this one out. Like, the time is now. We have a tool. It's not the end all solution to your problems, but it's a big, big help. So heed the call.
Yeah, do it.